Today's episode of the TribCast is sponsored by the City of Corpus Christi, Texas Realtors, and Water Grows. Welcome to the TribCast. I'm Eleanor Klibanoff, women's health reporter at the... I am not the women's health reporter at the Texas Tribune anymore. Wow, that is just like muscle memory. I'm Eleanor Klibanoff, as of today, the law and politics reporter at the Texas Tribune. Here with as always, with my co-host, Matthew, editor-in-chief. Still has the same job as he did yesterday.
Yeah, but sometimes I've worked at the Tribune for 10 years, but sometimes I still almost instinctively tell people that I'm a reporter from the Dallas Morning News. So I feel you.
That's a deep cut for you. Matthew, where in the world are you?
Eleanor, I'm someplace warm.
A
place where the beer flows like wine, where beautiful women instinctively flock like the salmon of Capistrano. I'm talking about a little place called Aspen.
Wow.
That, by the way, just before I creep anyone out, is a quote from Dumb and Dumber. I hope folks picked up on that, and I'm not just talking. Yes, I'm in Aspen. I am at a convening of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. It is almost too beautiful to bear out here. I'm angry to be inside recording for these 45 minutes and not outside. But yeah.
At least you have all those plugs.
What's that?
I said, at least you have all those plugs.
Yeah, you had everything charging. It's a good chance to get charged up before you go back out into
Carlos,
wilderness.
I unplugged that before we started recording, and I don't appreciate you bringing it up.
We invite you to watch this episode on YouTube and see the Matthew's plug setup. Well, that sounds great. I am glad you're in Aspen. I'm not jealous at all. Actually, as we've discussed, I weirdly am going to Aspen in a couple of weeks for a different conference. Apparently, it's real conference season in Aspen.
Yeah, I think so. I think you might be actually coming to the same place that I am right now. And I will tell you, Eleanor, it's pretty good.
Man, that's great. How are you with the altitude?
I'm doing okay.
Okay.
It's my flight in got canceled on Sunday night, so I had to spend a night in the crappy near the Denver airport hotel, which allowed me to adjust a little bit more, gradually.
Acclimatize. Yeah.
Yeah.
When I'm going directly from New Orleans, which is like the lowest sea level, to Aspen, which is like the highest, and so I think I might die. Anyway.
Drink lots of water.
Yes.
Drink lots of water.
Yes.
Everyone has been telling me that. They're like, oh, you're from Texas? Drink lots of water.
Well.
And then they're also like, we in Colorado hate Texans. So.
Oh, wow.
This is a perfect segue to talk about our subject of the week, which is, we've jokingly been calling this episode Infrastructure Week. As most people listening, I presume, know, yesterday was Sine Die, the last day of the legislative session. And a lot of times, like the stuff that gets the biggest headlines or the legislators certainly enjoy talking about a lot are sort of these culture war issues or sort of more socially conservative issues. Obviously gets a lot of airtime. But a lot of what Texans care about has to do with our infrastructure. Can we keep the lights on? Can we keep water flowing? And so we wanted to talk today about what our lawmakers did on those issues and what the future of life in Texas looks like. To do that, we are joined by Alejandra Martinez, the Texas Tribune's environmental reporter, and Carlos Nogueras Ramos, the Texas Tribune's Permian Basin reporter. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Quite a geographic spread we have. We've got Austin, Fort Worth, Odessa, and Aspen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We are all over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's start with water. Hugely important topic this session. The Texas Tribune, specifically Alejandra, Carlos, your teams, especially with Jamie Lozano Carver, did, I believe, almost 24 stories on the water, the state of the state's water systems. A phenomenal project. If you guys haven't taken the chance to look at these stories, I mean, really just so comprehensive and really, really accessible. It was a huge topic of conversation this session. So, Ale, why don't you start by telling us why water and why now? Like, why are we now talking about water? What's the state of the crisis?
Yeah. Well, I mean, not to be an alarmist, but I mean, in the state, Texas is running out of water and pretty fast. There's a lot of things threatening our water supply. There are aging pipes that are leaking. That's like old infrastructure, sometimes hundreds of years old, still under the ground and piping our water that hasn't been repaired or upgraded. There are drought pressures that are only really worsening with climate change. And then we have the population growth, these booming areas across the state. I think DFW is going to need more, like about half as more as it requires now in a couple years. And so there's all these things really squeezing our water resources. And you mentioned the series Running Out, where we documented all these different aspects of what's happening with our water supply in the state. Part of that series, we used state data from the Texas Water Development Board to look at what is our long-term water supply and how long is that going to last. And one estimate showed that Texas towns and cities will, and I'm saying will, not could, will face a water shortage by 2030. You're talking about 5 years from now. This is if there's a historic drought like we saw in the 1950s, and if no water solutions are implemented. And so water was a pretty big deal, and our state leaders took note of that. You had Governor Greg Abbott who made water an emergency item and called really early in the session for a quote, like Texas-wide investment to water. And so there were all these different things that people were paying attention to, and that people had been noticing in these last couple of years with like the intense droughts that we've been having across the state, the continuous boil water notices that happen because water pressures are down due to old infrastructure. And so really this session, they geared down and started figuring out what can we do. And I guess so like, where did we end up with, right? You mentioned Sine Die was yesterday. And after a lot of debate and discussion, which we should definitely get to later, all the water drama that was happening at the Capitol. But the final deal that came out would allocate $1 billion a year starting in 2027 until 2047 to secure the state's water supply. That's $20 billion in total. And that money would be used for new water, quote, new water supply projects is what they call it, which is desalination, which is removing minerals and salt from brackish groundwater. That's really salty water. Or another solution is repairing old infrastructure, conservation, and flood mitigation projects. And so that $1 billion will be a ballot amendment measure that voters will get to cast your ballots and vote on this upcoming November. So that's one piece of the bucket. And then the second piece of the bucket is a one-time investment of $2.5 billion into the water fund that came out of the current budget surplus. So you have billions of dollars that were secured this session for water. Is that enough? We know that it's not, right? There are a lot of amazing think tanks like Texas 2036 and others that have made their estimates of how much is needed. Sometimes I think that estimate's like hundreds of billions of dollars. So, but it is one step forward is what water experts and water lobbyists are saying.
Ollie, I want to drill a little bit deeper into that last point that you made, right? Intended. So the Texas 2036 report you're talking about, I'm citing the story that you wrote here, was that the state needs $154 billion by 2050, right? So when you hear $20 billion plus another 2.5, you think, wow, $22.5 billion, that's a lot of money. But that's a lot less than $150 billion by 2050. I mean, what's the mood among the people who have been calling for this, in the lead up to this session? Is it yeah, this is great. We did what we need to do. Is it, okay, this is a good start? Or is it, oh God, this was the big moment when everyone was rallied around this and we didn't even, get to half of what some people said we needed up until this time?
Yeah. I think the mood is, it's a great start. I mean, a lot of these water experts and lobbyists are just, I think, in some ways happy that the issue's like finally getting attention. You have a senator at the Capitol, Senator Charles Perry, who's been advocating for water money, like any funding for water, for I think over a decade. And so there's been a few number of people who have been really pushing for this kind of water investment, but it wasn't until like this year that it seemed like more people got on board or understood what is happening. I think a lot of recent events added to that. I mean, I know Carlos, who's on this call too, like he wrote about, I don't remember if it was Odessa or Midland, but cities in West Texas with continuous boil water notices, right? So there's like more and more communities facing those immediate problems or issues because of our water systems, right? And so I will note that also last session, there was a dedication for water funding. Nothing as big as this session, but I think it's like what I'm hearing is like these baby steps are what's going to build or get us somewhere bigger, right? So although we had one of the, what they're calling the biggest investments for water in Texas history, they're going to come back next session and push for more is what I'm hearing.
Carlos, I want to ask, like, you're in the Permian Basin, like a region that, as I understand it, is really hopefully going to benefit from some of this water money. I mean, what's the outlook there for water, and what are you sort of hearing about, how this deal is being received in that area?
I would agree with Alejandra's assessment that there is a lot of buzz and excitement. We will take anything we can get. The water boil notices that I wrote about was because I lived them. We were without water for almost a day, and before I had moved to Odessa a year before, the city had been without water for 2 days, and that was an infrastructure issue more than it was a money problem. And so, like she said, if there's a solution, we want it, because the ones we have now are limited. The Texas Water Development Board is limited in what the authority it has and the money it can distribute. And so, yeah, it's good news. I would also say, I covered water from the oil and gas industry standpoint, and among these folks, there is a sense that you can't just throw money at a problem and expect it to kind of make it go away or disappear. And so there was a conversation here around what the oil and gas industry could contribute into the water dilemma. Considering that it's an industry that requires so much water to operate and run. And as you know, we broke records last year for oil and gas production. This year, we are set to do the same. I mean, we are drilling for so much oil and gas, which takes water. And so, but, from under the earth also comes water. And the question was, can we clean this water, or can we treat it to a standard that is acceptable to the agency and safe for consumption? But guess what? That's also going to require so much money, because it takes infrastructure, it takes energy to clean it. And then, once you do, how do you get it to the places where it needs to go? Do we build pipelines, and then do we have a workforce that's able to build that? And so it's a dilemma with a lot of moving parts. And so certainly people say, this is a good start, but certainly nowhere near the finish line either.
It was interesting, Ale, there was a lot of agreement on the idea that we need to do something about water, but there was a lot of disagreement in how to go about doing that. I think like one of the big questions, right, is if you're going to solve the water problems, you can create more supply, or you can patch up and fix a lot of that infrastructure, right? Like one of the big issues driving this water problem isn't just that we don't have enough water, it's that a lot of the water that we have is being leaked into the ground via pipes. There's Carlos mentioned the problems in Odessa. There's things like that happening all over the state. And there seemed to be some disagreement among lawmakers, right, about which of those two things to invest more in, the supply or the patching up of the pipes. Can you talk a little bit about that conversation and where we landed there?
Yeah, this is definitely where the water drama happened. How are we going to spend the allocation of this money, right? The leaky pipes versus new water supply, which it could include like desalination or treating oil field wastewater that Carlos is mentioning. And so at the early start of the sessions, there were kind of these two proposals that were put up. One by Senator Charles Perry that kind of divided those buckets of money into an 80-20 split. 80% of that fund would go to new water supply projects, desalination, treating oil field wastewater. And then the remaining 20% would go to everything else. That includes infrastructure, conservation, water reuse, aquifer storage recovery projects, and then the other proposal, which was by Representative Cody Harris, kind of made the allocation and said, the Texas Water Development Board will know where best to spend this money because they're the agency that have the biggest connection with communities across the state, and the water board knows best. And so this is where that kind of fight over the ratio, the split, grew more heated and heated over the course of the session. We had water experts and lobbyists at first being kind of hesitant to speak for or against that ratio or split, in fear that, speaking about it would put in jeopardy any type of water funding, right? These are people that are finally like, yay, we're finally talking about water funding. And, if we say the wrong thing, maybe everything will come undone and no more water funding. So, but as the session progressed, and they saw that, these bills weren't coming out of committee, or they were being delayed on the process, or they weren't getting put on the House or Senate floor, more and more of them started to speak up against, and when they spoke up, it was against this 80-20 ratio led by their quote water champion, Senator Charles Perry, who finally put water on the map at the Capitol. And so it required a lot of conversation with different people because so many of them were at many times hesitant to go on the record because of what I just explained, putting water funding in jeopardy, but knew that, or they felt that split wasn't the best because they were very concerned about why are we going to start creating new water supply, right? When we haven't fixed our infrastructure. So we're just going to pump more water for it to leak out of our aging pipes. They didn't agree with that approach. And so what we ended up with, or what they ended up with and landed at, was that a 50-50 split. So the first half of the money would go to all of the projects: conservation, water reuse, desal of seawater, brackish groundwater, and developing reservoirs. And then the remaining would go to the Water Development Board, which what we heard has identified a number of projects that already need that money, and they will determine which of those projects will get it. I think a lot of people are interested on like what projects end up getting that money after that really like back and forth debate over new water and infrastructure. And that's what we'll have to see in the next couple of years as that money starts rolling out.
And Alejandra, just sort of to tie up this issue, it now will go to the voters, right? And
yeah.
I mean, do they anticipate this will pass? Like, it seems like an issue people are sort of generally supportive of, but it's a pretty big price tag.
Yeah. I think there have been a couple of surveys that were done ahead of session of, do voters want more money to go towards water? And I think they were overwhelmingly supportive of that. The people that these organizations surveyed, and based on conversations I've been having, there are no worries there. But we'll see. We'll see when the election comes around.
It's a slam dunk. It'll pass.
Yeah.
That's certainly feels like a thing people are, it's very tangible to be like, do you want to be able to have water? It's hard to vote no on that. Though some people, I'm sure, find a way. Well, let's take a quick break and thank our sponsors. Today's episode is supported by Corpus Christi Water. Learn how the city of Corpus Christi is securing an affordable, sustainable, and environmentally friendly water solution for the coastal bend during serious drought conditions at sustainablewater.corpuschristitx.gov. Texas Realtors. With more than 145,000 members, Texas Realtors is a professional membership organization that represents all aspects of real estate in Texas. We are the advocate for realtors and private property rights in Texas. Learn more at texasrealestate.com. And Water Grows, our food, economy, and future. Discover how Texas farmers make strides to make water last for Texans now and for generations to come. More at watergrows.org. Well, let's turn now to the other major issue that gets people a little stressed out, which is the grid and our energy infrastructure.
I would just like to say that there are way more than two issues that get people stressed out.
There are two issues that stress Texans out. Survey says only two. Everyone is so calm about everything else. No one is freaking out about THC or bail or anything else.
Sorry, I messed up your flow.
No, you're fine. Texas is expecting, well, let me say this. If you're not freaking out about the grid, stand by. Texas is expecting the state's energy demand to double in the next 6 years. It's really unclear if we'll be able to sort of meet that demand and keep up with that. This was such a huge issue on people's minds, when we had Winter Storm or Uri. I always forget how you say it. Winter Storm Uri? Alejandra.
That's a fake name anyway, so you can pronounce it however you
when they
want.
had the freeze.
I don't mean the name Uri is fake, to be clear. I mean calling winter storms names is fake.
The freeze of 2021 in the middle of session, put this issue really in the spotlight. Carlos, I know you've been covering the sort of whole infrastructure of like the energy infrastructure. How big of an issue was this for lawmakers this session?
First, I just have to say I'm glad we're having this conversation now because I'm working on my story that I have to file, and it'll be nice to have this fresh in my mind.
Great.
And maybe I'll just take what I said here and just put it into words and be done with my story.
Yeah, brainstorm out loud.
I want a contributor tag on the story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the TribCast contributed.
A couple bylines here, I guess. A pretty substantial deal, I would say, ever since the 2021 grid catastrophe that Texas experienced, I think, kind of inspired a sense that the legislature needed to do something about the grid, something it had not significantly acted on before 2021. And the question, the central question became, how do we keep people's lights on when this happens again? In 2021, immediately following Uri, I was just talking about this with Pat Wood, who's the former chairman of the Public Utility Commission, and immediately after 2021, it was a response plan. How do we fix what's broken now? And then in the 2023 session is how do we encourage more infrastructure? Because if you don't know this, we have an energy-only market in Texas, an open energy market in Texas, which means that power generators, the people who give us the resources that convert into electricity, what we call megawatts or gigawatts, the natural gas plants, wind and solar farms, battery storage, needed to shore up infrastructure, right, so that they can meet the demand. So how do we, as a legislature, speed that up? And so we came with a couple of ideas. Some worked, others didn't. There were some performance credits that were floated around that ultimately fell through. And then we had the Texas Energy Fund, which had $5 billion injected into it in 2023, and it all went to natural gas infrastructure. Those plants are years away from being built. And through all of these short-term solutions, the question still was, how do we make the grid reliable? Because so far, the answers that we have are very, very far away down the timeline. Meanwhile, guess what's happening? Texas is growing. We have people moving here. Businesses want to come here. We are becoming a hub for data centers. And so for the legislature, now it wasn't just a question, it's can we ensure that the grid is reliable without blocking business development? Can we still assure people that Texas is a place that you can come tap into our grid and we won't put too many hurdles to do that? And so that's what that was at the center of or at least my coverage. Senate Bill 6, sponsored by State Senator King, Phil King, puts wide-ranging rules around energy users, particularly the industrial customers. I'm talking manufacturing plants, oil and gas plants, hospitals, for example, big data centers, people who just suck up a lot of the energy. A lot of new rules there. ERCOT, for example, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, now has the latitude to shut off power to plants over 75 megawatts. So if you're a mom and pop, that doesn't apply to you. Just want to make that really clear. But this is unprecedented. It's very new. It gives us a lot of unilateral authority, and there's of course language that was put in there to make people a little bit more comfortable around the concept, but it's still new. The remote disconnection, or what people avoid calling the kill switch. There was also a big question around if we're going to grow as a state and we're going to deliver the nearly double amount of electricity that you mentioned earlier, who is going to pay for that? Who's going to pick up the tab? Because for that, we need to build infrastructure to deliver electricity. And usually the people who end up paying for that is everyone on this call, the everyday electricity users, transmission costs, that's how they're allocated. And so in this bill, there were questions about, can these industrial facilities put a little bit more money up front so that in the long term, it doesn't run up the tab on our utility bills? So that's just one of many things. I mean, I have like a whole page of notes, but that was like the kicker, I think, for this session as far as energy is concerned. And then, of course, something that never misses in Texas is the politics of renewable energy and how much we want them to be here.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the Senate Bill 6, I mean, obviously a very high priority number, or a low number, a high priority. Pretty surprised, like Texas famously very anti-regulation, sort of putting these sort of rules in place for businesses and major manufacturers and things like that. How was that received by the business world, let's say?
A lot of trepidation around the specifics. I think something everyone agrees on is that the grid needs to be more reliable. That benefits everybody in the long term. When there's another Uri, which will happen, to be clear, everyone wants to have electricity. But the devil was in the details for a lot of these folks, and there was concern around, you can't just shut us off like that. And then if you just say, like, for example, it only applies to facilities of 75 megawatts and up, well, that could be a hospital too. So are you shutting off a hospital if the grid needs to reroute electricity elsewhere? And so I think for folks, it comes down to the rulemaking. So what that means is that the agencies involved in this, the Public Utility Commission, will need to come up with the specifics. And I think in the coming months, that's that's where the conversation will play out. But coming back to your question, I'm sorry, bit of a tangent there. Coming back to your question, yeah, a lot of trepidation around the remote disconnection, the red tape. There were questions about whether, is this helping costs? Is this helping reliability? Business arrangements between a natural gas plant and a data center. ERCOT now has oversight over that. And so for folks, it's, how does that help, the residential consumer in the long run when this is an individual business agreement? But I think ultimately people were, amicable to the idea of a bill that gives the grid more security.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, what I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Carlos, was driving a lot of this fear, right? It was specifically the addition to the grid, the projections of additions of data centers, Bitcoin miners, and a lot of these sort of new technology uses, where in some cases the state really wants to attract this, right? We want to be a leader in AI. We want, a lot of our state leaders have really kind of extended a hand to the crypto industry and everything like that. But the just massive amounts of power that those facilities require was scary to a lot of people, particularly to a lot of politicians who I think felt no stronger blowback in the past few years than what happened in that 2021 winter storm. And a feeling like if we go through something like that again, and the reason we went through it was because Texas sort of just rolled out the red carpet to these massive industrial uses that don't really individually create, there's not a lot of people actually working in those facilities, right? And there's a lot of skepticism around, particularly the crypto industry, that they need to be able to do something to avoid that because, among the things that are going to piss off their voters the most would be allowing something like that to happen again.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The driver of this conversation was the forecast that came out that, put out a number that scared everyone and said, well, how do we respond to this? 20 years ago, we broke up monopolies and that move, gave out what they call a market signal for people to come here and do business. But then it started straining us in other ways. So how do we come up with a political response to this? What is the appropriate amount of policy? But yes, that was data centers and the oil and gas industry were absolutely what drove the conversation this session.
Matthew, where did you go?
Housekeeping for my hotel was knocking on the door.
Oh,
so
I see. I feel like
I tried to make it smooth, but thank you for.
I had to know. Yeah, no, I think that's all really. I think, Matthew, that's a very strong point too about also just the timing of the storm being in the middle of a session. I think about I was not here in 2021, but I arrived not long after the storm, and just the way that now people, everyday Texans know what ERCOT is and have an opinion on it is so telling of you never want to have to know what ERCOT is. In an ideal world, I think ERCOT would prefer that nobody knows what they are or what they do, just because that means things are probably working the way they're supposed to. And so now, a lot of scrutiny in recent years.
Carlos, can we talk just briefly about what, if anything, the legislature did related to green energy? I mean, one of my favorite topics is this sort of contrast, right, where state leaders have largely been opposed to the idea of, really pushing and incentivizing green energy, while at the same time, Texas has seen a massive increase in green energy production, far outpacing places like California, where there seems to be a much more political will to grow that. How has that industry come out of this session, do you think?
Unscathed, I will say. It's funny. One of the things that I was talking to Doug Lewin about, the author of the Texas Power and Energy newsletter and an expert in this industry, is that this session was defined not only by what passed but also by what didn't. Like last session, there were bills targeting renewables directly. For example, a repeat of Senator Lois Kolkhorst's looking to put a lot of red tape on renewable energy development. The way renewable energy has done so well in Texas is because you can just go up to a private property owner, come up with a business arrangement, set up a royalty system, a payout for that person, and then you just put your wind or solar farm there, so long as you can follow the rules around that. And there are also federal stipulations in that. But Senator Kolkhorst did not like that. They expanded really fast and thought that it merited a little bit more scrutiny, which garnered a lot of backlash from the renewable energy industry, as you can imagine. I mean, they essentially said it would kill them, and they wouldn't grow nearly as well as they did. And it's been an interesting political response to an industry that contributed megawatts. We didn't have outages last summer because our storage and generating capacity, the amount of energy we were able to harbor was more, and it helped make the grid reliable. But of course, the politics of a Republican state play into that. We're really resentful of the federal subsidies that renewable has gone at the federal level, even though Texas hasn't given a single cent to renewable energy. But the response to renewables in the session was what you would expect, in large part because of the politics, but also because lawmakers. Are you okay, Eleanor? You went a little bit dark.
Ironically, the lights have gone off in here.
The lights are off.
Which is a very...
I had asked Rob to do that after you were making fun of me. Did you? No, I didn't. But I wish I had.
We talk about energy.
That's
the lights.
So funny. What crazy timing.
Get a microphone.
There they are.
Anyway, for those not watching at home, or those not watching on YouTube, all the lights went off for a minute. They came back.
Look, we've all worked a lot these last few days. We're tired, It's,
it's lights out for all of us.
Yeah, exactly, and that's a sign.
Well, but then what I was going to add is that for lawmakers, there was also a sense of strengthening what they call dispatchable, which is just the traditional forms of energy. So think natural gas, coal, and now battery storage is kind of in that definition as well. They wanted to make sure the grid could rely just as much on those energy sources as much as wind and solar, but in doing so, they kind of singled out renewable energy and tried to force them out of the definition of dispatchable, which, in one bill, they would have been punished if they couldn't come up with natural gas plants as backups to the wind and solar farms. And in another bill, if the grid wasn't meeting 50% of its energy source from dispatchable energy, the renewable companies would have to pay a credit to kind of make sure the economics of that were evened out. But it comes down to the politics of this. We like certain sources of energy. We are a proud oil and gas state that also just happens to have a really strong renewable energy industry. And it's, who do we favor and how do we go about that? And does everybody have a place in the open market? I think in the policy, it kind of says it, right? No, they don't. It's the sources that we would prefer that make us more comfortable for the grid's reliability.
I think not unlike water, going to continue to be a major political issue going forward for future sessions. Sounds like, a lot of movement this session, but nothing really permanently resolved in any way that will, allow lawmakers to stop talking about the grid as much as I'm sure some of them probably want to. Well, let's leave it there. That's it for today. You can find all episodes of the TribCast on YouTube or wherever you find your podcasts. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share the podcast on all of your platforms. If you'd like to get in touch with the team, you can reach us at tribcast@texastribune.org. Thank you to our sponsors, City of Corpus Christi, Texas Realtors, and Water Grows. Thank you so much to Alejandra and Carlos for joining us. And once again, if you haven't already, check out their series on water and Carlos's really great coverage of the fights over, the grid reliability during the session. Our producers are Rob Avila and Chris Svoboda. Our theme music is composed by Rob, and we will see you next week.